The quiet began before anyone realized it, slipping into the house like a shadow that didn't belong there, and Claire felt it the moment Daniel stepped outside to answer his phone, leaving her alone in the living room with Ethan, her son's longtime friend, a boy she had known since he was all elbows and nervous smiles, now standing by the window as if he wasn't sure where to place himself. The afternoon light falling across his face while he stared at the floor, his shoulders tense, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, and Claire, used to reading moods the way some people read books, sensed something heavy sitting between them, something unsaid, and she tried to keep things normal by folding the blanket on the couch, smoothing it again even though it was already neat, asking casually if he wanted water or coffee, but Ethan shook his head, too quickly, too sharply, as if the question itself startled him, and when she asked if everything was okay, he nodded first, then stopped, then slowly shook his head no, and that small movement changed the room, because it wasn't teenage awkwardness or boredom, it was fear mixed with resolve, the kind people carry when they've decided to speak but don't know how the words will land, and Claire waited, giving him space, remembering how often he used to sit at her kitchen table years ago when Daniel and he were still in high school, quiet but polite, listening more than talking, a kid who carried sadness without complaint. And now he cleared his throat, took a breath that sounded heavier than it should, and said he had been trying to say something for a long time, his eyes still locked on the carpet like it might give him answers, and Claire felt her chest tighten, not with alarm but with concern, because whatever this was, it mattered to him, and she wanted to hear it right, and Ethan spoke faster then, as if afraid the moment would slip away, saying he didn't want to make things strange or wrong, that he just needed to say something out loud, something he'd kept inside for years. And the way he said years made Claire's fingers still against the blanket, her mind racing gently through possibilities, school trouble, a fight with Daniel, worries about his future, but none of those quite fit the weight in his voice, and he shifted his feet, glanced toward the door Daniel had gone through, then back to the floor, and said he had always respected her, always noticed how she treated people, how she listened without judgment, how she stayed calm when others raised their voices. And Claire felt a quiet surprise, because she had never thought of herself as someone who stood out, just a mother doing her best, and Ethan continued, words coming in a rush now, saying there were times when he felt lost, especially after his own family had broken apart, times when he didn't know who he was or where he belonged, and being in her home, hearing her steady voice, seeing how she showed care without expecting anything back, had meant more to him than she could know. And Claire felt emotion rise unexpectedly, a soft ache behind her eyes, because she remembered those days too, remembered offering small kindnesses without realizing how deeply they might land, and as Ethan spoke, his voice trembled just enough to show how hard this was for him, how much courage it took to stand there and admit that someone else's presence had shaped him, and the room felt fuller, charged with something quiet and serious. Not uncomfortable but intense, and Claire noticed how he stood straighter now. Like speaking had given him strength even as it made him vulnerable, and when he finally paused, swallowing hard, the silence that followed was thick, filled with all the things he hadn't said yet, all the meanings hiding between his words, and Claire understood then that this wasn't a simple conversation, that it was the opening of something emotional and delicate, something that would need care, and as she looked at him, no longer just her son's friend but a young man standing at a turning point, she sensed that whatever truth was coming next would change how this moment lived in both their memories, and just as she opened her mouth to respond, to reassure him, to ground the moment, the sound of Daniel's voice drifted faintly from outside, reminding them both that time was still moving, that the world beyond this room hadn't stopped, and that whatever Ethan was about to share, he had chosen this moment for a reason, and Claire held her breath, ready to listen, knowing that part one of this story was not about what was said, but about the courage it took to finally begin speaking at all. Ethan's voice shook slightly as he began to speak, finally lifting his gaze from the floor, revealing eyes that carried a mixture of fear, hope, and something unspoken that made Claire's heart tighten. He started carefully, as if choosing every word could prevent the moment from unraveling, saying he didn't want to be misunderstood, that he needed to explain himself fully, and Claire, sensing the weight of his words, nodded, silently encouraging him to continue, wondering what truth had been locked inside him for so long, and Ethan's hands moved nervously in his pockets before he finally placed them on the windowsill, drawing in a breath that seemed to carry years of unspoken feelings, confessing that he had always respected her, admired the way she treated people with kindness, patience, and understanding, and he admitted how her presence had comforted him during difficult times, especially when his own family was fractured and he felt alone, how her voice, calm and steady, had given him a sense of stability he hadn't found anywhere else, and Claire felt a wave of emotion, remembering glimpses of that quiet boy at her kitchen table, lost in thought, barely speaking, but always observing, always learning, and she realized the depth of what he was trying to convey, that this wasn't a casual acknowledgement but a heartfelt revelation about how much he valued her influence on his life. And Ethan continued, words tumbling faster now, spilling from him as if once started, they could not be stopped, saying he didn't expect anything in return, that he wasn't asking for her to act or feel differently, he just wanted her to know that she had mattered more than he could ever express, and Claire listened, struck by the sincerity and vulnerability, noticing the tremble in his voice, the way he avoided her eyes at times, the way his body seemed both tense and relieved at once. And as he spoke about the nights he had struggled with feelings of uncertainty and sadness, how thinking of her guidance had given him hope, she felt a mix of pride and compassion, realizing that his words were a gift, a rare, honest glimpse into someone's heart, and Ethan paused, taking another deep breath, admitting that knowing she had listened, truly listened, had changed him, shaped him into someone trying to understand himself and the world better, and Claire, feeling a lump in her throat, reached out instinctively, placing a hand on the back of the chair nearby as if to anchor herself in the reality of his confession, and she marveled at how much courage it took to stand there, young yet mature in that moment, exposing something so private without fear of judgment, and Ethan, sensing both the gravity of what he had revealed and the relief of finally speaking, whispered that just being able to say these words aloud made a difference, made him lighter, less burdened, and Claire felt the room shrink around them, not in discomfort but in intimacy, the kind that forms when one human being truly sees another, and outside the window, the afternoon sun cast golden shadows, highlighting his earnest expression, and she realized this was a pivotal moment, a turning point not only for Ethan but for their relationship, for the understanding that trust and honesty could create a bond beyond conventional roles, a bond based on respect, admiration, and shared human experience. And as he finally looked up, meeting her gaze, there was a vulnerability there that demanded acknowledgement, a soft plea for recognition of his feelings without expectation, and Claire, taking a slow breath to steady herself, responded quietly, telling him that she understood, that she appreciated his honesty, and that his courage to speak his truth was remarkable, and in that exchange, the room seemed suspended, filled with emotions neither fully named but deeply felt, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside the walls disappeared, leaving just the two of them. In a space where raw emotion and heartfelt confession existed side by side, and Claire knew this was a memory that would linger, a quiet testament to the power of speaking honestly, the delicate balance between admiration and personal boundaries, and the profound effect one person can have on another, so that when Ethan finally exhaled, his body relaxing slightly, she understood that part two was not only about the confession itself but about the release, the courage it took, and the subtle beauty of connection formed through shared truth, leaving both of them changed, even as life outside the room continued, indifferent to the quiet, transformative moment they had just experienced. Claire's heart raced softly as she took in Ethan's words, feeling the weight of his honesty settle in the room like a gentle storm, and she realized that responding required care, patience, and kindness, because this wasn't a simple conversation about school, friends, or everyday worries, it was about feelings, vulnerability, and the complicated mix of admiration, gratitude, and longing that he had carried quietly for years. And as she chose her words, she spoke slowly, deliberately, telling him that she was honored by his trust, that she valued his courage in sharing something so personal, and she explained gently that caring for someone could take many forms, that admiration, respect, and gratitude were all forms of love that didn't have to cross lines, that sometimes the heart felt deeply for someone without changing the nature of the relationship. And Ethan listened intently, eyes wide and searching, nodding as if absorbing every syllable, his hands gripping the edge of the chair slightly, a sign of both tension and relief, and Claire continued, reminding him that life often teaches through connection, through moments of honesty and reflection, that recognizing someone's positive impact on your life was a sign of emotional growth, and that he had shown maturity by speaking, by allowing himself to be seen, and Ethan's breath hitched softly, a mixture of relief and lingering uncertainty, and Claire offered a gentle smile, saying he was on a path that would lead to love, to relationships that matched the depth of his feelings, that someone out there would meet him fully, appreciate his sensitivity, and cherish the qualities that made him unique. And she emphasized that sharing emotions didn't weaken a person but strengthened them, that acknowledging what was inside was the first step to understanding oneself, and Ethan's gaze shifted from nervous anticipation to something calmer, a sense of peace beginning to form as he realized he had done what he needed, that his feelings had been acknowledged without judgment, without expectation, and Claire felt a mixture of pride and tenderness for him, recalling the shy, quiet boy who had once sat at her kitchen table, and now stood before her, a young man capable of honesty and reflection, and she noticed how the room seemed to breathe with them, the sunlight streaming through the window highlighting the tension that had dissolved into quiet understanding, and as they shared that unspoken bond, she gently reminded him that life was full of opportunities to express care, to love, to connect, but also to respect boundaries and grow individually, and Ethan's shoulders relaxed, a small smile breaking through as he whispered that he was grateful just to have been able to speak, that the act itself lightened a burden he had carried alone for far too long, and Claire nodded, feeling a surge of warmth and empathy, understanding that this moment, though simple on the surface, was layered with courage, growth, and a subtle, tender affection that could exist without overstepping, and she reassured him that such feelings were natural, human, and nothing to fear, that his honesty was a gift she would remember, and in that instant, time seemed to slow, allowing them both to linger in the significance of the exchange, to recognize that while life moved forward, the memory of being seen, being heard, being valued, would remain, shaping them quietly, subtly, and Ethan finally looked at her fully, no longer avoiding her eyes, carrying a sense of relief and a fragile hope that he had been understood, and Claire, meeting his gaze, realized that part 3 was about the delicate balance between acknowledging feelings and maintaining clarity, about nurturing growth, about offering kindness without misinterpretation, about holding space for another human's heart while respecting boundaries, and as the sound of Daniel's voice drifted from the hallway, signaling his return, both Claire and Ethan felt the moment shift, knowing that this chapter of conversation had reached a pause, but the impact would linger, shaping their connection in ways neither could fully articulate, leaving Claire with a deep sense of respect and care for the young man before her and Ethan with a quiet sense of liberation, the courage of truth transforming the ordinary afternoon into a moment neither would forget. The house felt quieter than usual after Ethan left, the kind of quiet that lingers when someone has shared something important, and Claire stood in the kitchen, absent-mindedly rinsing cups she hadn't really used, her mind replaying every word, every tremor in his voice, every pause that carried meaning beyond what was spoken, realizing that what had happened earlier wasn't just a confession but a release, a shedding of weight he had carried alone for years, and she felt a mixture of emotions, pride at his courage, tenderness at his vulnerability, and a profound appreciation for the human capacity to feel deeply and honestly, remembering how he had stood by the window, hands on the sill, eyes sometimes on the floor, sometimes searching hers, and how those small gestures had conveyed more than words ever could, and as she reflected, she understood that some truths are not meant to alter the course of a relationship or redefine boundaries, but simply to be voiced, to be acknowledged, and in that acknowledgement, to transform the person who speaks them, making them lighter, freer, more at peace with themselves. And Claire thought about the way Ethan had expressed that he didn't expect anything in return, how his words were a gift, an offering of honesty and gratitude, and she felt the warmth of that intention, realizing that it spoke to a maturity beyond his years, a sensitivity that allowed him to love, admire, and respect without demanding, without needing reciprocation. And she considered how rare it was for someone to stand in the presence of another with such openness, to risk vulnerability and still maintain dignity, and as the afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor, she pictured him walking away, carrying with him the relief of having spoken, the quiet triumph of confronting his own heart, and she felt a soft smile tug at her lips, understanding that while the conversation had ended, its impact would ripple through both of their lives, shaping the way he approached relationships, how he expressed himself, and how she remembered moments of genuine human connection, and Claire's thoughts drifted to the idea that some bonds are formed not by physical closeness or shared daily routines but by the act of witnessing another person's inner truth, by being present, attentive, and compassionate, and she recognized that in allowing him to speak, to share what had long been hidden, she had participated in a rare and meaningful exchange, one that honored the courage it takes to face your own heart and admit what you feel without fear, and she felt gratitude for the trust he had placed in her, for the way his honesty reminded her of the subtle power of empathy, patience, and care, and she realized that life often presents these quiet, fleeting moments that don't change the world outwardly but transform it inwardly, teaching lessons about human nature, resilience, and the beauty of vulnerability. And Claire understood that Ethan's visit, his confession, and the calm closure that followed were a testament to the strength it takes to be true to oneself, to release emotions safely, and to honor the delicate balance between intimacy and respect. And as she set the last cup on the drying rack, she felt a lingering warmth, knowing that Ethan had left not only with his burden lightened but with a sense of clarity, that speaking his truth had reshaped his own understanding of courage, of connection, and of gratitude. And she realized that this was the quiet magic of human interaction, the way words, sincerity, and careful listening could leave a lasting imprint without ever crossing boundaries, without altering the essential course of life, and she smiled softly, letting herself savor the gentle satisfaction of having witnessed something real, tender, and transformative. And even as she heard Daniel's footsteps approaching from the hallway, the ordinary world returning with its familiar sounds, Claire knew that part 4, the closing of this chapter, was not an ending but a continuation of growth, a quiet celebration of honesty, trust, and emotional courage, leaving both her and Ethan changed in ways subtle yet profound, carrying forward a memory that would remain with them, a reminder that speaking the heart's truth, even without expectation, can be one of the most freeing, beautiful experiences life offers.